Welcome to the Podunk Polymath, a podcast dedicated to the sentiments of a secular, sarcastic, screwed-up Southern SJW and skeptic. I'm your host, Chris. Come on in. This is episode 34 of the Podunk Polymath podcast. Thanks again for joining me. Hope you all had a great weekend. I don't have anything on the preamble really this week, mostly because I have... I don't know. It's just the same old bullshit. It's hard to get worked up about anything, to be quite honest with you. I will say that I was on Not Another Atheist podcast with Jen and Keith. Me and Jen recounted our adventures at NanoCon, which of course was awesome, as I mentioned in another show. And this is actually a little more in depth. So if you want to hear more about the NanoCon experience, I would encourage you to go check out the show. The link will be in the notes, the show notes, of course. Like I said, I don't really have anything else. Do look out for me on Tucker's podcast. We just recorded. He did a couple extra ones because he's going to be at ReasonCon and we won't be able to record there, even though I'm going to try to record some stuff. But I'll be on there. I don't know what episodes yet. When they come out, I shall share them. So just look out for that. Like I said, not much to say this week. Trump still sucks. Oh, I will say that Mike Flynn, of course, the former National Security Advisor who was fired, asked to be given full immunity to testify about Russia's links with the Trump administration. So that's pretty juicy information. I'm hoping that maybe we get a little impeachment coming out of that. Of course, Pence is pretty bad, but at least he's within the continuum of political badness and not the craziness that is the Trumpster, the Cheeto-in-Chief. So we shall see what happens. I don't know. This whole situation is just out of hand anyway. Oh, and another thing, Hawaii extended the stay on the other law he tried to pass regarding keeping Muslim immigrants out. So he just keeps getting shot down over and over again by the courts, which is fucking awesome. On the palaver this week, I have a special guest that many of you may have heard of. I'm going to not tell you who it is, I think, make you wait a bit, even though if you look at the show notes, you're going to know who the fuck it is, but indulge me. He's, like I said, we're going to be talking about Christian movies and their kind of the genesis and their impact on the movie industry and on the populace at large. So do stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey y'all, this is Tucker from the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. And I might live in a beer can, but I ain't no inbred redneck. And if you listen to my podcast, I'm gonna learn you something. And no, I ain't talking about how to marry your cousin and not have kids with 16 fingers and stuff like that. I mean, I actually talk about real stuff and teach people where the Bible stole its stories from. So y'all give me a listen, would you? Thank you.
Where's the best place to meet your online friends? Where's the best party where the fun never ends? Where will Bobby Carey be our MC too? I bet you'd go if you only knew. It's ReasonCon, in Hickory, North Carolina. It's ReasonCon, and the speakers couldn't be finer. We've got Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra, Callie Wright and Lawrence Krauss. We've got god-awful movies coming to you live, and Jim Craig and Shelley Siegel really jive. It's ReasonCon, meet the people in your favorite podcasts. It's ReasonCon, the conference where you'll have a blast.
Welcome to another edition of the Palaver here in the Podunk Polymath podcast. This week I have a gentleman on that needs no introduction. Of course, he's the co-host of Scathing Atheist, God Awful Movies, and the Skepticrat. Without further ado, I'd like to present to you, Noah Lugeons. How's it going, Noah?
It's going good, man. How you doing?
All right. Yeah, so everybody already pretty much knows you who listens to this podcast. Of course, your wit is pretty well known throughout the community, and of course, you along with Eli and Heath do all the great shows, Scathing Atheist and God Awful Movies and the Skepticrat. But we're going to talk a little bit on this show about specifically the Christian movie industry. Of course, your show God Awful Movies that's pretty much the premise. And as I told you before we started recording, I naively thought y'all might run out of material sometime in the near future. However, I was surprised to learn of the lack of dearth of movies out there that are of the Christian persuasion.
Yeah, it is quite incredible. We get that pretty much constantly. Like, anytime I get interviewed about the show or I talk to someone about the show for any amount of time, they say, well, how long can that possibly go? And I say, based on our current list, I'm thinking something like 16 years if they stop making them now.
That just boggles the mind, to be quite honest with you. And I had read an article to prepare for this, and they said it kind of started with Omega Code, which I vaguely remember coming out in 99, and that kind of started the whole. Of course, had been going on a little bit before that, but that kind of was the genesis of the entire industry, I guess, going so big. Why don't you kind of give your opinion overall about the industry itself?
All right. Well, it's really interesting to look back sort of over the history of it, because really, you can say that the history of Christian cinema goes back as far as the history of cinema. We've got reports that go back as far as 1899 of people using motion pictures to try to spread the word of Jesus. And the first truly Christian movie came out in 1912. That was From the Manger to the Cross. And if you're familiar, if you love silent movies as much as I do, you're probably familiar with the 1916 movie Intolerance, which it was divided into 4 stories. One of those stories was Jesus getting crucified. So there's always been Christian cinema, but there's sort of a new animal that's cropped up over the last few years. And I've seen it attributed to I've seen, people who said, started in 99 with the Omega Code. More often I see people who say it really ramped up in 2004 with Passions of the Christ. Obviously that remains the most profitable faith-based movie of all time by leaps and bounds. But I think sort of the modern, what we mostly deal with on our show really can be traced back to as early as 2014. When God's Not Dead hit big in the box office and the major studios realized that, holy shit, you really can make money with these things. Like when Passion of the Christ went out and made $370 million, a lot of people probably thought, okay, that's a one-off type thing. Mel Gibson's crazy, but it worked this time. This is not replicatable. Now, there was a huge uptick in religious films after that, but it wasn't until pretty recently that they started to realize that, hey, you know what? Even crappy made, or I should say crappy scripts that are well made with decent actors can make serious money in the box office. Like I said, David A.R. White proved that to us with God's Not Dead in 2014. And since then, it's been an onslaught of, relatively big budget Christian movies.
Yeah, of course, God's Not Dead's a horrible fucking movie.
Oh my God.
Just from the perspective of logic and reason. And Kevin Sorbo, he seems to have kind of come up as the quintessential Christian actor, I guess. I guess his turn in Hercules wasn't enough for him, so he has to fucking, come across as even a bigger asshole,
I guess. Well, when you watch Christian movies as often as I do, you see this sort of, B actor and post-porn brigade of stars. Kevin Sorbo, I think, is sort of at the top of that heap. Maybe Kirk Cameron is close to it. But you also have Corbin Burnson and Howie Mandel and Mr. T and Gary Busey, all of these B actors. And then usually if you look into the history of the female leads, you'll find, they're 3 years out of porn. But what they want is someone that you recognize, right? Because this whole Christian film industry, it's been going sort of underground for a really long time, right? Christians do this with everything. There is, obviously we're all familiar with Christian music, right? Especially if we happen to live in Tennessee. And it's just this knockoff version of music, right? It's people who aren't good enough to make it real music, so they slap some Jesus on it and sell a few extra albums. And of course, music is relatively cheap to produce when you compare it to things like movies. So the step down in quality for movies for the longest time was a lot lower. And it didn't matter. There was still enough money for these guys to make, straight to DVD movies and movies that show on Christian television stations and that they play in churches and whatnot. There was enough of an audience for them to make, a couple $1 million on these terrible, awful movies that they made for $80,000. So this industry sort of just kind of got rolling along, and they could put out, the one studio could put out 20 of these crappy movies in a year. And so the infrastructure was able to sort of grow up around these church viewings and straight to DVD type marketeering strategies. And until they actually had enough money to say, all right, let's put $3 million into this movie. It's going to be a crappy script, but the lighting will be good. It'll look like a movie.
Yeah, that is something I have noticed, and I'm sure everybody else with any, modicum of film knowledge knows. They're just so shitty. They just have shitty scripts, and they're just shitty acting for the most part. I mean, how much effort does it take to at least put a little bit of effort into a script? Or, I don't get it.
I mean, I think honestly that they probably do have some talented writers working in Christian cinema, but the creative consultant is God, right? So if you look at some of these, because there are a few movies like faith-based movies where that are truly big budget. You think about like Darren Aronofsky's Noah or Ridley Scott's Exodus. Right. They had a lot of money. They had real stars, Russell Crowe, Christian Bale, like real movie stars in them. Those movies didn't go over well with the Christian audiences because they weren't like biblical enough. They weren't strict enough about their interpretations of all the Jesus stuff because they had real directors that wanted to, exercise some creative freedom. And so these ones flop in the box office. But then when you've got like Pure Flix that neuters every script to the point where no, there's nothing controversial here, nothing that's going to upset a single Christian in this script anywhere. By the time you bleach all of the things that might offend a Christian out of your movie, what chance does the writer have?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. When you have to bleach it of everything that's even moderately controversial, you're not left with much to work with,
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with one of the guys who he played a starring role in one of Ray Comfort's movies. And this guy was, by trade, he was a family comedian. It's like a family-friendly comedian who got cast in this role. And as part of the movie, he had to stand up and just do a little bit of comedy. And he said in the interview, like Ray wanted me to keep it clean, so I did the cleanest damn thing I could think of. And he still runs up and goes, whoa, that's way too controversial. Say something less offensive or so, when Bill Cosby level comedy, pre-rapist Bill Cosby level comedy is, too insightful for you, basically, yeah, that the whole industry relies on not offending grandma. So how much fun can it be?
Yeah, I remember Heaven is Real. That came out and that was, what was his name that was in there? It's
Greg Kinnear.
Greg Kinnear, yeah, who used to be on The Soup, and when he was actually funny, or maybe he still is. And the acting wasn't that bad, of course the premise was a bit silly, and of course it later turned out that the kid made all the shit up. But that's a different story. But movies like that one seemed to have a little bit of a plot to it, and even probably gained some viewers from, not blatantly Christian communities or whatever. So I guess in that context, sometimes there are, like you said, Noah and Exodus, of course. But then again, like you said, a lot of, the super Christians who are their audience are just like, that's not Jesus-y enough. I mean.
Right. Well, if you look at the top 10 Christian movies of all time on like Box Office Mojo or something, you're not going to see those movies. You're not going to see Noah. You're not going to see Ben-Hur. You're not going to see the movies that take any amount of chance with it. As a matter of fact, it's a really interesting list. Heaven is for Real, the one you were just talking about. That's number 2 on the list after Passions of the Christ. That came out in 2014. Of the 10 movies, and now Box Office Mojo counts the Chronicles of Narnia movies as Christian movies. I don't, for the purposes of what we're talking about here. I mean, they obviously are overtly Christian, but, they're not the same kind of movies that we're talking about. So if you knock those off the list, 7 of the top 10 grossing Christian movies of all time came out in the last 4 years.
Wow. Yeah. And that makes me think it's going to keep getting worse. Well,
yeah.
Better from their perspective, I guess, but
well, better from my perspective as well. I have to watch this crap.
That's true. That's true. See, yeah, you kind of, let's talk about that a little. How do you prep for the god-awful movies? Do you watch the movie like a couple of times to take notes, or how does that process work?
Well, I'll tell you what, it depends on the movie. A lot of times if we're doing something that's in theaters, obviously I got one crack at it. I'm going to watch it that one time. I'm going to scribble down some notes while I'm in the theater. I'm going to try not to laugh too loud and offend the old ladies that are in front of me. But the movies, like most of the stuff we do, are things that you can find on YouTube or that you can get streaming pretty easily. And in those cases, I usually watch them one time all the way through without picking up a pen or writing a word. And then I watch them again, sort of like picking them apart in my notes.
Okay. So now I know you script things almost, meticulously for your shows and whatever. And you can rarely tell that it's even scripted at all, which I think is an amazing talent in and of itself. But I noticed on some of your shows you have guests sometimes that come on. Are they also kind of scripted, or what's the deal with that?
Well, God Awful Movies is a much less scripted show than Scathing Atheist or Skepticrat. So what we normally do with that is that each of us will go through the movie and just, for each scene, we'll just make a few bullet points of funny things that we've noticed in that scene or things that occurred to us during that scene. And we'll invite the guests to do the same. Now, it depends on the guest. Some of them like to go in cold with no notes and just sort of like play off of what we've written. Some of them like to meticulously script things. And we sort of just let the guest do what they're most comfortable with.
Yeah, because I've listened to some of those, and they're pretty fucking hilarious. Of course, that's the whole point. But I guess what strikes me the most is some of these Christian movies. I really don't know how to describe it other than to say that it's like they're almost purposely bad. It's like... it's hard for me to understand, even if you're a Christian, for example, how could you not see that that's just a shitty movie,
There have been so many times that I'm watching movies, especially the ones that you can get like free on YouTube, that Eli finds, where like I expect the very last scene of this movie to be Eli pointing at me going, gotcha, you thought it was real. Because there are times when you're just like, are they being serious? Did they mean for this to be this stupid? And it may be that we've gotten duped once or twice, but, no, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And also I was reading that article about the pastors basically being gatekeepers for these movies. So, of course, pastors never make money off anything by promoting it, as we all know. Not at all. So now they've become kind of like the middlemen for some of these films, and especially the mega churches who have, of course, built-in audiences. Do you think that plays a big role in how this kind of movie industry spread?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it plays a role in mainstream movies as well. I'll give you a great example. When the Superman reboot that Zack Snyder did, the Man of Steel, came out, they marketed that very heavily to churches, so much so that the studio actually wrote up a sermon based on that movie and sent it to different mega churches along with a video that sort of previewed the movie and really sold it as a good Christian experience. If you've watched that movie, you can see that there's a lot of like overtly Christian gestures within the film. So yeah, I mean, like a lot of the mainstream Hollywood studios have recognized that churches are great captive audience marketing. Now, you look at the big players in the Christian movie industry, companies like PureFlix Entertainment, the way they really get their start is by the fact that these churches will play their movies. You figure there are something like 5,000 churches in the country that have a theater capable of playing a PureFlix movie. A Christian movie playing just in churches can open on as many theaters as a blockbuster hit.
Yeah, that blows my mind. They've got basically built-in screens, you're right. And I think a lot of it is the Christian community is its own little bubble in and of itself, because of course they've latched on to this whole Christian persecution complex. That's, we are being persecuted. Of course, I don't know how you're persecuted when you're like the vast majority of the population and you cannot get elected in this country without saying you just love Jesus so much,
Yeah.
So it's just, I guess I'm just a little surprised that it's gotten such a toehold in the mainstream media market.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, because it is so patently, absurdly bad, it's impossible to look at most of these movies and not think, wow, that was crap. And even, when we went to the Reason Rally last year, Eli and Heath and I all went out there, and we asked a lot of Christians that were there to protest, do you watch Christian movies? What are your favorite Christian movies? And almost to a person, they said, no, they're horrible.
Okay.
So even the fundamentalists generally don't like these movies. I think a lot of it, though, is like, if you're taking grandma to a movie, what are you going to take her to see? Or something like that. Or maybe if grandma's taking the kids to the movie, the only thing she's going to take them to is going to be the thing that says Jesus in the title,
How many times does grandma go to the fucking movies, though?
Often enough for War Room to make $67 million. I'll tell you, obviously the market is there, right? So if you look at like the 1990s in Christian cinema, what you have is these just insanely bad. I mean, we're talking about movies like God's Not Dead and Heaven is for Real. These are movies that, like, they use professional cameramen and professional lighting and professional editing and whatnot. But, a lot of the movies that came out in the 80s and the 90s are just literally like the kind of stuff that you could make on your phone now in an afternoon. And even those movies were getting sold at Walmart, right? The DVDs were selling out here and there. So I feel like what you had was a market that was underserved for probably decades. And as soon as they saw a movie where, like, it looked like a movie, if you just paused that movie and a real movie, you couldn't tell the difference between the two. When they saw that, they're like, holy shit, we've hit the big time. Right? So as small as this audience is, it's really easy to bring them all into a pretty bad movie as long as the camera is pointed at the actors most of the time.
I try to give people, groups of people, the benefit of the doubt, but it's extremely difficult when I find so many millions of dollars being made off these movies, which are clearly horrible. And it's difficult. Like you said, I mean, it's pretty much a captive audience, it's an underserved audience. But I gotta think that even the people who are buying this shit are almost buying it because they feel like they kind of have to, because their pastors told them that, go buy this movie. And I even, you already said that they give them sermons to try to sell a fucking movie. And so it's almost like giving in the collection plate or something, basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, give $20 and get a free DVD on the way out. Well, how many Christians do you know who have like nice worn out Bibles that sit in their car that they've never read? So you have to imagine there are at least a few Christians out there with a shelf full of Christian DVDs they've never watched.
Yeah.
Something to show off when the neighbors go, oh, they must be really Christian. Look at all these Kirk Cameron movies.
Yeah, it's like the coffee table version, having the Rolling Stone on the coffee table, or the magazines that your guests go through or whatever to make you look cool or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except the exact opposite.
Yeah, I can't imagine there being many viewing parties in the Christian homes. Like, hey, you want to come over and watch, God's Not Real? Or what was the Corbin Burnson movie? And I know you had mentioned him and Mr. T were in the movie.
Yeah. Oh, which one was he in?
It was something. It was a sequel, and I can't remember the fucking name of it.
Yeah, was it one of the Apocalypse movies?
Yeah, I think I forget what the fucking name. But it.
I've done like 4 Apocalypse trilogies at this point, so they all bleed together.
Yeah, well, Trav Mamone had said he was watching it, and I was like, let me see how bad this shit really is, because it was on Amazon Prime. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And it was... Okay, Corbin, he tried. I gotta give it to him. He tried to act, even with the shitty script he had. But Mr. T, why? Why? Just why? It's like they just picked some guy. Okay, you need a job? All right, you were in a couple movies back in the 80s or whatever, and you had your own, your own A-team. All right, you're in. Yeah.
If you had a breakfast cereal, you're good enough for us, I guess. Yeah.
It's just, of course, like you say, though, the production value is getting better on some of these movies, and I think those are the ones that may be funding some of these lower budget ones, because you got to think apparently PureFlix now has a subscription service for these movies, and I got to think, does PureFlix make their own movies?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they make their own movies. So I got to think that some of that is trickling down. They're basically reinvesting it in other shittier movies,
Right. Because they can make, a Matter of Faith for like, whatever, $400,000. It's super high quality, right? Like as far as like camera work and lighting and, like have an actual movie production going on around this ridiculous script, and pay Harry Anderson, another one of these B actors that you vaguely remember if you were around in the 80s, as all the people who are watching these movies apparently were. So you can get a real actor and you can get real cameramen, and for a small amount of money. And then, that little movie can turn around and make $2 million for you or $3 million for you, just on, direct to video or DVD sales or I'm sorry, obviously that's, I just said the same thing twice, but or on streaming services like PeerFlix. And I, by the way, I'm a subscriber to the PeerFlix streaming service. It saves me money in the long run. And 99% of what's on there is the stuff that never makes it to the theaters and, would be otherwise direct to DVD.
Is any of that any good at all?
I don't know. I don't think PureFlix has ever done anything that's any good at all. No.
And people, I don't know their numbers, but surely it's got to be pretty high. I'm sure it's not Netflix numbers, but it's
it's funny because their streaming service is so amateur and nothing ever works. And I've like had to email them 100 times because the whole thing just, crapped out. It's like my website. It's like my website, but a streaming service.
Great. So, of course, I guess all those Christian subscribers just figure they're not praying hard enough to get the shoot. So,
God must not want us to watch this one, y'all.
Yeah. Let's go back to a little bit to you're talking about Passion of the Christ was kind of the modern genesis, I guess you could say, of kind of the industry. Now, I remember seeing that back when it came. Well, I waited a while to see it because I was like, really? No. Too much. And it was bloody as hell. And I know that was his purpose because Mel Gibson is out of his gourd.
Yeah.
And I think his dad was like some kind of just end times evangelical nut job preacher or something.
Holocaust denier as well.
Yes. We don't. Yes. We don't want to forget the incident when Mel was pulled over drunk and started blaming everything on the Jews.
Well, his dad has gone public even sober saying that kind of shit. So at least you have to get some booze in Mel before he says it.
So what do you think it was about that movie particularly that kind of sparked this kind of industry as we know it today?
I got to say, I think what really happened for that movie is for the first time Hollywood saw the value of that captive audience church marketing, right? Because Passions of the Christ played in a lot of churches and a lot of church groups sponsored viewings. Brought their whole group out. Everybody we're all going to go watch Passions of the Christ today, guys. And, the church discount ticket or whatever, if we bring in 20 people. So I think that may have been really the first time that the major players in Hollywood had their eyes open to stuff like that. Because look, I mean, Heaven is for Real was released by TriStar Pictures. It was not released by, Dave and his aunt, Susan Productions or what have you. So, the major studios have realized at this point that there really is money there. So, they're a lot more willing to work with companies like PureFlix and throw them a little bit of money and throw them a little bit of studio time, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was going to take someone as insane as Mel Gibson to figure this out, because so many of the studios just didn't want any part of that evangelical audience, because I think they rightly assumed, or not rightly assumed, but assumed for reasonably assumed, that's what I was looking for, that, the evangelical Christians wanted anti-abortion movies. They wanted movies about how gay people aren't really people, because that if you watch the news, that's what you see of evangelical Christians. Well, what they want is a movie that they can, feel good about and not feel guilty about, that is not, like you say, that is not like filmed on a first generation iPhone with candlelight.
That makes me want to try it and see what that looks like. Be pretty fucking funny. I think you're right. The Passion of the Christ is definitely one of those movies that, for good or for ill, was pretty much a turning point, I guess, for the industry at large. And like you said, Mel Gibson was just a nut job. So what else can you expect? So where did it go from there? I mean, I don't know the curve. Did the curve go immediately all the way up, or was there kind of a dip?
Well, yeah, it was sort of a slow roll after that. So in 2004, there were 5 movies released that would be considered like Christian movies, and that counts like direct to video. I mean, I'm sure there were like movies that no one's ever heard of, but if you look at like Wikipedia's list of Christian movies, there are 5 entries in 2004. One of them, of course, being Passion of the Christ. In 2005, it's 6, right? Because it takes a couple of years for them to ramp this up. In 2006, it's 20. So there was a pretty immediate reaction when the studios saw the kind of money that Passion of the Christ made, where they said, okay, let's start investing some money in that. Took them a couple of years to do it. And from then on, it's every year, it's at least 14, 15, 18 movies that are being released trying to capture that. Now, I think it took them a little while to figure out how to get that market back. And it wasn't really until God's Not Dead came out that they said, okay, here's sort of a formulaic Christian movie, right? Like, this is a Christian movie we can see ourselves redoing more or less over and over again that actually made real money. And that's why, again, 7 of the top 10 earners have come out in the last 4 years, because that's when the studios really saw not only that it could be done, but how it could be done.
Well, let me ask you, let's kind of move on to another topic, god-awful movies. That show, of course, and like I just said, I found out that you don't have any lack of good material to go by. What was kind of the genesis of that project?
Well, you know what? I'm going to credit God's Not Dead with that one as well. When that movie when they first started advertising that movie, Eli Bosnick and I were friends. He was a regular guest on our Scathing Atheist podcast. At that time, he wasn't a regular on it, though. It was just Heath and I that did the show. Along with my wife, and he got in touch with me. He would come on and do guest spots for various things. He was always pitching ideas to me, and they were mostly great ideas. He said, I want to review God's Not Dead. And, Eli is one of these guys that just loves terrible movies. It's a passion that he and I both share. And I giggled about it, and I was like, yeah, that should be a lot of fun. Well, we had him on. It's one of the funniest things that has ever happened in my life, sitting across from him as he recounted that movie. He went on for like 35 minutes about how, about just, almost scene for scene recounting it. I was laughing the whole time. It was one of our most popular episodes ever. So right away, we're like, okay, when's the next Christian movie? What's the next one we can do? So it became very quickly like a monthly segment on our show. Then Eli lost his day job. He told me, he's like, yeah, man, I don't know how often I'll be able to do this anymore. I got to get a new job, and then I'm going to probably have to work a lot more hours. And I'm like, well, why don't we see if we can make this your job? So we set up a Patreon account. We reached out to our listeners and said, hey, look, we want to do the Christian movie reviews as their own show. In order for Eli to pay his bills, he'd need to make about $400 an episode out of it. So if we can get to 400 an episode on this Patreon, we'll make this show. And within about, I think, 2 days, our listeners had stepped up and said, hey, yeah, we'll pay Eli's bills if he's willing to watch a Christian movie for us every week. So the rest, of course, as they say, is history.
Yeah, y'all have covered a good amount of movies. Do you have like favorites? Any favorites that you've covered that are more or worse than some others, or best? I don't know how you really put that. Yeah,
best, worst. That's sort of an interchangeable term for me. Well, there's two types of worst when it comes to these Christian movies. Like is like the worst made movies, like the worst acting, the worst lighting, the worst audio production, etc. And then there's also the worst, as in the worst message. Like the most destructive things that we've watched. So, we've watched movies about how, women who are raped should really have that baby and forgive their rapist and give him a chance to be a father to that kid. We've watched movies about, how gay people really should subject themselves to gay conversion therapy. We've watched movies about how the secular government really is coming after Christmas, y'all, and you're the only ones that can defend it, so get your guns. So those have their own, crazy category of worst. But when it comes to just like worst movies, as in like, if you love bad movies, you will love this movie. My favorite of all time is called International Gorillas. It's not a Christian movie. It's a Muslim movie, and it is probably the singly most insane thing that I've ever seen in my life. Now, this is one we did before we started God Awful Movies. It was one of the ones we did when we were still doing it on Scathing Atheist, but it was this extraordinary, like painfully, unforgivingly long movie about 3 Muslim brothers setting out to kill Salman Rushdie, who in this movie's universe lived on a fortified island where he beheaded Muslims for fun. And it's a musical.
What? No, you're lying.
There are about 7 dance numbers in it. It's Bollywooded out. There are 600 explosions. Like, they actually spent money on this movie, clearly. with all the stunt work and explosion. And it's the silliest damn thing you can ever imagine. If you didn't know that the people in this country would be, like strung from their own guts, for making this, if it wasn't a joke, you would assume it was a joke, right? Boy, did I fuck that sentence up. You guys know what I mean. You know
it's, whoa, who made it? I mean, where'd it come from? Is it who produced it, or what country did it come out of, or anything?
I believe, if I remember correctly, did it come out of Pakistan? It was, it may have come out of Pakistan, if I recall correctly. Yeah, there's not a hell of a lot of movies out of Pakistan. No, I'd have to look it back up, but it is just, it's, you can't imagine how insane and bad it is. And there are just these moments, at one point, the good guys, the brothers, show up in a nightclub to kill Salman Rushdie, but there are actually 8 lookalike Salman Rushdies in the club, and they can't decide which one to kill. And for no reason whatsoever, no reason that is explained within the movie, all 3 of them are dressed like Batman in this scene. They don't set it up. They don't show them getting Batman costumes. Just all of a sudden, all 3 of them show up. They're dressed like Batman. They have a dance fight with 8 Salman Rushdies, and then they run off because they can't decide which one to kill. The movie ends with the Quran coming down from heaven, right? The clouds part, and a very poorly CGI'd Quran flies down from heaven, shoots Salman Rushdie with lightning until he melts like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, I swear to you, this is all really in the movie. You can find it on YouTube. And if you find it, just go to the end of the movie, because it's almost 3 hours long. It's an incredibly long movie. No one can make it all the way through that. But go to the end of this movie and just watch the climax. It is so worth it.
If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're making all that shit up because it sounds so it sounds so ridiculously absurd, but I've heard of it. I've heard other people talking about it, so I guess it's a real thing.
If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd be, look, we're all skeptics here. I can't blame you. I would have had to see it to believe it as well. But yes, it is a real thing.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm surprised it's not a cult classic. And well, maybe it is in Pakistan, since they can only see 2 movies there, probably.
Yeah, right.
They can't see anything else. Shit. Whatever the government tells them they can see, I reckon.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about a funny one. Have there been those movies you've watched that illegitimately pissed you off because of the message?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, okay, so there is a website called christiancinema.com, and that's where you find the movies that PureFlix would not touch. Right? This is where you find the anti-abortion, anti-gay, anti-Jew movies.
Oh, anti-Jew.
Yeah, we watched one called The Accidental Bar Mitzvah, about a Jewish family that has to move to, the dad gets a job at a college in Nebraska or something like that, and the Christian family next door talks them out of their Judaism so that they can go to heaven.
Are you fucking kidding me right now?
Nope. Now, that's a really hard one to find. Oh. It's, like I said, christiancinema.com is the only place I managed to find it. And we were actually looking for that movie for about a year and a half before we realized we could get it on that website. Some listener had turned us on to it, and we'd been scouring the internets for it. But, yeah, that's a real thing. But I'd say of all the things that we've ever watched, the one that pissed me off most is the one that we did for our live show in England. We did Andrew Wakefield's Vaxxed documentary.
Oh Jesus, yeah.
Oh wait, that wasn't it. But that we did that movie. It was a different time. But yeah, that don't vaccinate your children. Yeah, that one's gonna piss me off more than most.
Yeah, is that the one that De Niro did or whatever?
Yeah, he teased doing a screening of it at the Tribeca Film Festival, and then when the entire world told him to go fuck himself, he backed off of that, but he's been lukewarm on Wakefield, and been way more supportive than Wakefield deserves a number of times publicly.
Well, I mean, if you showed your ass for that guy, I guess you got to figure you got to go all the way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that blows my mind that even got to that point. And of course, that's a whole other show, the vaccination craziness that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how long's the show been going on at this point?
We just recorded, I believe, our 84th episode. of god-awful movies, and we're about to do our 215th of Scathing.
Yeah. Does it get old? I mean, aside from the fact that, of course, it's fun to do just because it's fun to watch bad movies. But at some point, doesn't it get kind of like, oh, Jesus, I got to watch another one of these shitty movies?
Well, I'll tell you what, for our patrons, for the people who subscribe to the show, we do a monthly secular movie as well. We pick one of the terrible Hollywood movies to break down, and those give me a lot more. That's a lot harder for me when I've got to watch like The Happening or Super Mario Brothers the movie. That's a lot harder for me to steel my nerve for. With the Christian movies, though, I go into it with a smile on my face, thinking to myself, this is the best PR that atheism has.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But the only problem with that is that atheists aren't going to be watching that fucking movie. If they have a captive audience, it's just people like you who are going it for a laugh. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to spend my money on it if I can help.
Well, right. And I don't recommend that people do, but I do think that enough, like again, some of these messages are so poisonous and some of these movies are so despicable that, and even like sort of the mainstream movies will still have these like digs against mental health services, right? That's a really popular one with PureFlix movies, that they'll come out against psychiatry an awful lot. They'll come out against marrying non-Christians and things like that. Even the sort of, not mainstream, but the more mainstream for Christian cinema, even those movies will have those kind of poisonous messages. So my hope is that there are enough like moderately Christian people watching these movies, seeing these messages and going, man, I really got to rethink my allegiance to this group.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess even in that community, in every community, there's going to be outliers, of course. But you got to think at least some of them are like, okay, this is fucking complete bullshit. And kind of it starts their path, and if not necessarily atheism, then maybe more of a skeptical mindset. And sometimes that's enough, I guess. Not everybody ends up in hardcore atheism or whatever. So,
well, like when Ken Ham opened his Ark Park, my silver lining on the Ark Park was, when people walk up and see that Ark in its actual size, they're a lot more likely to go, yeah, no way in hell a 700-year-old guy did that with his kids. No way in hell that thing floated with no kind of steering mechanism whatsoever. So, maybe the Christian movies will give us at least a little bit of the same thing, right? Like when we watched a movie called Persecuted a number of years ago that was supposed to be all about a preacher that, wouldn't sign on or wouldn't endorse this law that Congress was trying to pass that would persecute Christians, and the powers that be, the black operatives of the government were coming after him or whatever. And the plot was so ridiculous that the movie never bothered to tell you any of the details of the law that was at the center of it, right? The MacGuffin was just a blank in this movie, because for all of their fancy, like you said, their fetish about being persecuted, there is no actual persecution. So even if you're trying to write a fictitious script about Christians being persecuted, they have nowhere to go. So in the same way, when they have to visualize their fantasies, maybe that helps them to see, wow, that is just fantastical bullshit.
You could be right. I mean, like I said, there's always somebody out there that's going to be like, what the fuck is this? This is complete bullshit. And then, like I said, that may start them on a path towards more critical thinking skills, which is in short supply nowadays, obviously, because who got elected. So
yeah, I do know that.
Have you now that particular podcast gets pretty good reach? Have you ever had anybody from that industry contact you or talk to you or anything?
We have, actually. We have a regular communication. I'm not allowed to divulge the name of the guy or which movies he's worked on, but a guy who has directed a number of Christian movies and a number of movies that we've reviewed and is an atheist.
That doesn't surprise me, actually.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, he's taking their money. I guess I got no issues with that. But, I guess I kind of have issues with that. If David A.R. White came to me and said, I want you to help me write this PureFlix movie, I'd tell him to go fuck himself. So maybe I have a little bit, I would have moral qualms with him, but I'm not going to lord it over this guy. He's trying to make money as a director, trying to make his living making movies, and he's managing to do that. And like I said, I'm making my living off of the fact that he's out there doing his job. I'd rather the money went to an atheist than somebody who actually believed in all of this silly crap. But yeah, and to be honest, like, and I've spoken to a few of the actors that have been in a couple of the movies that we've done in the past, and to be honest, most of them have no illusions. I love it when I say that. They have no illusions about how bad their movies are, right? Like, they understand that this is absolute crap, and they have a sense of humor about it. You know, a lot of them like listening to our show. I can't say a lot, but a few of them that we talked to like listening to our show because they're like, yeah, I mean, you know, we all knew that. You know, we all knew what we were making. We all knew we were making something for Grandma to fall asleep to.
Well, I mean, I guess it shouldn't surprise me. Would you say that that's a minority in that industry, these directors, or are there a lot of true believers, TM, you know, out there?
Well, you know, I wouldn't be in a position to say, you know, because we've only talked to a couple of them. My guess is that most of the people who are doing the technical work for these movies are just, you know, whatever guy they hired. You know, I mean, you don't have to, you know, I'm sure that there are certain people who specialize in these Christian movies that are true believers, and you know how Christians like to tend to throw business towards each other by saying, "Oh, you know, I'm a Christian landscaper. Look at the big Jesus cross on the side of my car here, so hire me." So I'm sure there's probably some of that happens, but I would imagine largely the people who are making these movies are, you know, the same people who are making any other movies. You know, when we're talking about like the pure flicks, like theatrically released movies, obviously some of these, you know, gays aren't people and Jews need to be talked out of it movies are being made by, you know, Fred and his, you know, clan group.
Well, and you mentioned this about the guy who's making these films and he knows his bullshit. I wonder, is there more, if you're a guy trying to make a living and you know that's the message of the film, I don't have any argument with like maybe the dollies or, you know, runners or whatever who do all the little stuff, and you gotta make a living, and they're probably union guys, you know, and they're just taking a job or whatever. But like you said, somebody who's higher up on the chain, I have a problem with if you don't believe any of that and they're having such a harmful message, you know, I'm iffy on that, you know?
Yeah, well, you know, again, and it depends on the movie, right? So, like, some of these movies, the message is, okay, so, like, what was the, oh, crap, what was the name of it? It had Jennifer Garner in it. It came out just a couple of years ago. I watched it in theaters. But it's Miracles from Heaven was the name of it. It came out last year. And this was a movie that was you know, quote unquote based on a true story about a little girl that went to heaven and, you know, some disease she had was cured. But the overall message behind the movie is that, like, miracles happen every day, and it's a miracle when I say, you know, good day to you and brighten your mood. And that was the whole message of the movie, right? So I don't take issue with the guy who directed that movie. Yes, he you know, whatever, shook some Christians down for some money here and there. But when, like I said, when the message of the movie is, you know, getting an abortion when you get raped is still a sin, or when the message of the movie is you better talk them Jews out of it before they wind up in hell, or you shouldn't have to cook food for gay people, you know, those people I am absolutely not forgiving. And even like the sort of the mind, like the God's Not Dead, like the director of God's Not Dead, you know, I feel like that guy should be ashamed of himself. You know, like the message behind that movie, I think, is damaging enough. But for these, like The Shack or whatever, like these, just where the whole message is Jesus loves everybody and everybody gets to go to heaven and there's no dead puppies. You know, I don't feel too bad for that, you know, or I don't hold too much against the directors and even the writers of those flicks.
Wait a minute, I thought puppies didn't go to heaven.
Well, they don't, but they don't die. They live eternally in like whatever it is, pre-puppy heaven. What is the thing that the Catholics have? The pre-heaven?
Purgatory, is that it?
Purgatory, that's it. They got rid of it. I don't think Catholics have purgatory anymore, so the puppies can have it. It's free.
Don't you love it when they change shit midstream, you know?
Yeah, right. Oh, God changed his mind. Really? The omniscient guy.
Yeah. It's like the Mormons. All of a sudden, black people were cool in the 70s or whatever. I thought that was pretty funny.
All of a sudden, polygamy was outlawed right when, you know, they needed statehood.
Exactly. It's just, anyway, that's a whole different show right there. What is your personal opinion on all this? I mean, just as a general philosophy about all these movies that you've been watching.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what, I think there's sort of a dangerous trend that lies at the heart of it. When I say dangerous trend, I mean dangerous for atheism. Right now, it's sort of a golden era for atheists as far as our ability to reach out to the world and say, hey guys, we're here, we're an option. Because what you have, especially like if you're in America today, you see the Christians most of the time when you see Christianity did X, it's some anti-gay thing, right? It's some despicable anti-progressive burning a Quran, protesting at a gay funeral, whatever, just being an asshole. And when you see Muslims did a thing, they blew some damn thing up, So right now is sort of like, and obviously Catholic Church is raping kids left and right and everything else. So it's sort of like a high watermark for bad religious PR. And atheists, I think, are taking advantage of that and doing really well with it. And I think that's why you've seen such a swell in atheist entertainment and in atheist books and whatnot, and in people who identify themselves as atheists. But I think that this, especially the movies that are coming out in theaters of late, betray a really good PR move for Christianity. And I think that they're learning how to get way better at selling Christianity to the modern American. So I think that this is like maybe a canary in the coal mine, that our free lunch is almost over and we're going to have to like rethink our tactics. They're not going to keep making it this easy for us.
Well, now I've had this argument before that basically it's like the last gasp and they're like cornered rats. And it's basically, they're trying to do everything they can to get back their privilege because they see it slipping away. And that makes them fight even harder. So I wonder if, I hope you're wrong. I hope it's not going to result in some, although I have to be honest with you, I think there's going to be like some major culture. I mean, after marriage equality passed, of course, they had to find another boogeyman with the trans bathroom, the trans rights thing or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm just afraid it's going to get worse before it gets better. So you may be right. We may be seeing a kind of upswing of, like they need any help anyway, really, because like I said before, 70% of the country is fucking Christian anyway.
Well, yeah, but that number is, significantly lower than it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But yeah, I mean, you look at it historically and there's an ebb and flow to it. But, I foresee that like the type of Christianity that you and I know, that you and I grew up around, especially if, you grow up in the South, I see that dying. I see that as unsustainable. The ages of the evangelical age is getting older and older, and as much as they try to insulate themselves with their own movies and their own music and their own radio stations and their own wrestling and their own museums and their own amusement parks and every other thing, as much as they try to insulate their kids from it, the technology is making that more and more difficult for them to do. But what will happen, or at least what history suggests will happen, is that religion will evolve quickly, and find the new way to market itself, the new, the modern Jesus that's going to appeal to the millennials and coming generations. And I think that Christian cinema is sort of a testing ground for that, to see which messages they can hold and which messages they can't.
You're probably right. And we're already seeing that with some of the movies, like you said, like the big budget movies, like Noah and Exodus. They didn't take too well, apparently, because I guess... in an interesting twist, they're not real. They're what? Yeah. That's not what the Bible says. As if the Bible.
Yeah,
itself.
That's not historically accurate.
Yeah, so the irony there is just enough to spin your head. Really, I mean, and we're seeing that, of course, like you say, heaven is real, and movies like that, and it is a little bit scary, and I think it goes along a lot with this anti-intellectual trend that's been kind of going on, and it's really scaring a lot of people, especially skeptics and scientists, because of the climate change thing, and other things like that, where people are like, oh, if Jesus, God wouldn't let that shit happen anyway, so it's fine, and a lot of people actually think that. That God wouldn't let that shit happen. If he wants it to happen, he'll let it happen, and I think that of course money plays a role, capitalism, of course, but to keep the masses, quiet about it, they feed them that Christian bullshit, to keep them in line,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, right. They need an opiate. Well, look, I mean, and that's the end result of it, right? Like, as much, yes, Christian religion or any other religion can reform and get better than it is, but ultimately, no matter how much it reforms, you're carving out an exception to reason, and there's no healthy way to do that.
No, absolutely not. At some point, you got to realize that, reason is reason regardless. It's not going to change just because you don't want it to be there, just because it doesn't agree with your preconceived notions. At some point you have to realize, hey, shit is just the way it is, and your religion is bullshit because it doesn't meet that criteria. So,
right.
Wouldn't you be happy for the show to end because there wouldn't be any more Christian movies? I know this is a fantasy world that I'm projecting here, but
yeah, I mean, if we had to start burning through the, whatever, go to stage 2 and burn through our helium fuel and just knock out the movies that were already made, that would be nice. I mean, if I'm ever unemployed because there's no religious stuff to talk about on the Scathing Atheist anymore, I'm not going to be super upset about that. But I just don't see it happening. Like you say, there's money there, and where there's money, there's going to be no end to people trying to have at it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. All right, Noah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find your work? Of course, I'm sure they already know, but just go ahead and remind everybody.
Well, you can find us on any of your pod-catching devices, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, whatever you use. Look for God Awful Movies, The Scathing Atheist, or The Skepticrat. Or if you prefer words on paper type stuff, my new book, Diatribes Volume 2, just hit the Kindle store. The paperback copy should be out in the next week or so. If you want a little bit of rage to set on your coffee table there, or something to scare off the Christian missionaries with, that's available as well.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the post you put up about how your book was right up there with all the good, atheist books or whatever.
Yeah. Always, quite a thrill when you look up and you see that your book is sandwiched between Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins. So.
Yeah, and I have to say that your diatribes, I'm sure I'm not the first one to tell you this, are witty, scathing, dare I say, and insightful. And I'm sure it takes a lot. I don't know. Maybe it comes right off the top of your head. I don't know how long it takes you to write these things, but they're definitely worth listening to and reading, either or, depending upon your taste. So,
well, thank you so much.
No problem. All right, man. Well, I look forward to hearing you in the next episodes of your podcast. And like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. I know you got shit going on in that I can't talk right. The shows you do take a lot of your time, and it's a lot of work. So, again, I know your time's valuable. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, I really appreciate the invite, man.
No problem. That'll do it for this episode of the Podunk Polymath Podcast. I want to thank Noah Lugeons for coming on and speaking to me about, god-awful movies and how they got started, basically, the show, and god-awful movies in general, basically Christian movies. So I really had a great time talking to him, and I really appreciate him coming on and speaking to me. I'm sure y'all liked it too. At least I hope you did. Of course, if you want to check out the show, you can come to podunkpolymath.com. Look on the About page. You shall see music, which is done by ... Go check their music out, cdbaby.com/cd/... Go to facebook.com/thepodunkpolymath. Twitter at podunkpolymath. Email podunkpolymath@gmail.com. YouTube and Google Plus at the Podunk Polymath. Patreon, if you want to join the posse, is patreon.com/thepodunkpolymath. Call and phone number 615-378-POPO 7676. Like I said before, I'm just not even going to beg anymore. Just call if you want. And of course, there's also the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse Facebook group, which is at facebook.com/group/the Podunk Polymath Podcast Posse, all separated by periods. And of course, now there is the Podunk Polymath Podcast online store at zazzle.com/podunk_polymath. Of course, if you go to the sidebar of the page, you will see that you can follow me on WordPress. There's the Twitter, the tweets are there, and you can also follow me via that little app or whatever you want to call it. PayPal donate button, buttons for RSS, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, and the Patreon. You'll also see recent posts and recent comments. Once again, thanks for listening to the show. I have noticed some friends. I've gotten some more likes on the old Facebook page. I'm coming close to 200. So if you got anybody that you think that might want to listen to the show, tell them about it. Maybe they'll come on over and like and get me to 200. So we'll see. It's not, I don't do it for that reason, but it would be nice. I'm not going to lie to you. All right, y'all. Well, until next time, y'all take it easy now, okay?